Fine, thank you.
Hi, Marianne.
Nice to meet you.
We have not. I saw you speak last night, but we didn't get a chance to meet.
Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely.
I keep thinking, well, what if you were here yet? I have to get my head in that this is what it is there's more than one. People see you more than, it's great. It's different for me. Hello, hi, how are you?
Hello.
Nice to see you. What is your name?
Sherry.
Did I see you
Yes.
yesterday?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Amanda Levant,
Nice
Asian
to
and
meet
Latino
you.
Coalition.
Oh, cool. Thank you. I saw you when I went to something for AXME. Didn't I?
Oh, maybe.
Yeah, it was
Possibly.
great. I thought you was one of us. So am I supposed to just do my thing? And then you do your, okay. I'm gonna do my thing first. No, did you want to say something first? Okay, this is Brent Roski, who's heading our team here in Iowa, and I'm extremely grateful to him for that.
Everybody here, thank you for coming. We know that everyone has day jobs. Do we need childcare, etc.? So for you to take time on 11 o'clock on a Friday to come visit with my favorite candidate is very special to me. So thank y'all for being here. This is a conversation with Marianne about the thoughts that are on your minds as Iowans. So there is nothing that is off the table. Marianne's going to give some remarks, and then we're going to ask some questions. So thank you folks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was saying yesterday, some of you have heard me say this before. It's really profound to be in Iowa. I felt the same thing in New Hampshire. Felt it in South Carolina. People are aware of how important you are in all of this. It's really a profound space of democracy. The decisions that you make starting a year from now will determine our political conversation in this country for at least 2 years going forward and probably longer. So I'm honored to be part of the process. I understand that really good people are running. I'm just honored to be one of them. I'm not running against anyone. I'm running with a lot of really smart people, all 1,736 who are so far. The conversation that I'm bringing, on terms of externals, I'm a progressive Democrat. Many of my beliefs in terms of externalities are very aligned with the Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. Doesn't that sound cool? It's really cool to even say those names. Yeah. I was, just as an aside, I was in Denver at the airport there about a month or two ago. And there was a waitress at a restaurant I went to at the airport. And I said, does anybody ever tell you that you look like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? And she said, I know, yes, they do. Isn't that great? And I thought, what a really profound gift she is to democracy. The young women are, it was exciting for me. This is good. But I'm talking about a larger conversation. I think we have a much bigger issue on our hands than just defeating Donald Trump in 2020. I think it's naive of us to think that it's as simple as that. There are so many lined up behind him in terms of those who represent forces that many of us feel are destructive to our democracy. If all you do is white knuckle it and defeat Donald Trump in 2020, he'll be back in 22, 24. If all you do is address the symptoms of the problem, then those symptoms, what you do to address the symptoms is a policy or a proposal or legislation that can be repealed 2 years later, 4 years later. We need to fundamentally impact American citizenship at this point. And that is what I feel that my conversation and my contribution and what my presidency would be. We need a moral and spiritual awakening in this country. That is what has led a kind of moral and spiritual rot, a disconnection from ethical and moral values in the public sphere, in our economic system, in our policy-making decisions, has led to political corruption and has led to immeasurable human suffering. That's what this is about for me. And so I'm having a conversation that I think of as integrative and holistic, that has to include the boosting of the American immune system. Most of what we have to worry about is like an opportunistic infection. It would not have happened. These things would not have happened had we had a stronger immune system. The Koch brothers and such, these people have been working at all this for a long time. Election cycle after election cycle, too many Americans have been disengaged, too cool to care. And this paradigm of just send me to Washington to fix it is really more, it sounds like empowering citizens, but it's actually further disempowering citizens. Because it's telling you, I'll do it. That's not what a democracy is supposed to be. And when somebody says, I'm going to go to Washington and fight you, but they're getting campaign contributions from the same entities that we know we want them to fight, come on, let's all wake up. Let's be real. Let's be grown-ups here. I don't want to go to Washington and fight for you. I want to go to Washington and co-create with you. We need an awakening of the American citizen. I have been, in that sense, a kind of personal awakener for 35 years. I have worked on how psychological and emotional dynamics awaken people and make people get straight again with the things that matter most, and then practically apply those principles in their lives. Having said that, when people say to me, who are you? Presidency isn't an entry-level position. You know what I say to that? You're right, it's not an entry-level position. And anybody who hasn't had a 35-year career working with people to get them to wake up and make their lives better shouldn't even consider running for this. We need to re-envision the presidency for the 21st century. FDR said that the administrative aspects of the presidency are secondary, that what matters most is moral leadership. And that's not symbolic. It takes as much experience and qualification and skill set and expertise to really help people change as it does to do any other. Not that I'm in any way minimizing political expertise, don't get me wrong. That is certainly necessary. But at this point, you know, you might have the best car mechanic in the world. The car mechanic doesn't necessarily know the road on the map that will best get you to Milwaukee. We need a visionary more than we just need a manager. And I feel that what I bring to the table, not just to elevate the conversation, I'm not here just to elevate the conversation, which is a woman. No woman would ever say to a man, well, you're just here to elevate the conversation, right? I'm here to try to elevate America. And I feel that together, not that I can do that, but that together this generation can do something extraordinary. And I feel that I can help lead that process. So that's how I see the presidency. And now I want to know how you see America. And I know, like I said, you're not going to be voting for anybody for at least a year. You're doing some deep listening, which is what you should be doing. Some deep investigation of the candidates, which is what you should be doing. I honor that. So I'm here, naked in front of you in that sense. Ask me what you want to ask me. Tell me what you feel moved to tell me. And I will listen to you as deeply as I hope that you're listening to me. Okay? Who's going first? Yes, sir.
So the big
and
news,
if you would say your name, that
sure.
would be helpful to me because that's all I want to know.
Absolutely. My name is Mike DeSilva, and the big news of the question I have is regarding Russia. The big news of this morning, Secretary of State Pompeo announcing that the United States is withdrawing from the nuclear arms treaty with Russia. And, you know, we've seen administration after administration successively, whether it's George W. Bush, who said he looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes and saw his soul, and he has a good soul.
I look into George Bush's eyes and see a very naive man to have said that.
But we also saw it during the 2012 campaign, during one of the presidential debates, Mitt Romney said that Russia was America's #1 geopolitical foe, and he was laughed at, and Barack Obama said the 1980s called and they want their foreign policy back. And now we see Donald Trump, who clearly has a very positive view of Vladimir Putin and is trying to get along with him. It seems like United States president after president fundamentally misreads Vladimir Putin. What are your thoughts on Putin? How would you deal with Putin and this relationship with Russia?
Putin is an ex-KGB agent. Putin, if you judge someone by their behavior and not just the things they say, there's an effort for all intents and purposes to rebuild the Soviet Union, to rebuild the Soviet Empire. I mean, that's just, whether it's the Crimea or any place else, this is very obvious. And the American intelligence services have made that clear. I think the president should not necessarily always, when he or she makes their conclusions, agree with the intelligence services, but certainly should be listening to their analysis because their analysis is very, very important. Now, I don't wish to look at the world as an enemy. And places where, but on the other hand, we must not be naive. And we should be very aware. As I think, it's interesting because I think that the president being so aligned with Putin has really made a lot of Americans wake up to the fact. I mean, we have been told enough by enough credible sources that the interests that he is now aligning himself with are not necessarily the interests of the United States. And that is simply based on Putin's behavior. So I don't wish to see the world as an enemy. That's whether it's seeing, you know, brown people, you know, coming up in caravans and just positing them as an enemy, or any other foreign person, or any other foreign entity. But neither should we be naive. I would like to have healthy opposition. We stand for different values. part of what is problematic about this presidency to me is that the president doesn't seem to have a visceral taste for democracy. There are Western values. There are Western values of liberalism that, and I mean liberalism writ large, which would include conservative as well as progressive, that we must stand. And as the most powerful nation in the world, and certainly the most powerful nation in the West, those things matter. We do not sacrifice our values. That is what has happened to America. We have been willing to compromise our values. We have been willing to compromise our values in how our own domestic economy operates, and we are increasingly, whether it's with Russia or Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, been willing to sacrifice our values internationally. Pompeo, who you just mentioned, in talking about the $100 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia, even though we know how much of that money and how much of those of our military support is being used to support the war on Yemen that has already killed, starved tens of thousands of people. Pompeo said that we could stand for our values and have strategic partnerships with people who do not share those values. I don't agree with that. You actually can't. So I believe that there are places where we must draw a line, and I would not be afraid to draw a line with Vladimir Putin. And I also want to say one more thing about nuclear bombs. When I was growing up, there was a very vital ban on nuclear. This is an area where we've just thrown up our hands. The American people have thrown up our hands and given up. We have thousands of nuclear bombs, and I want to remind you that the smallest nuclear bomb in existence today makes Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, look like pinpricks. I was mentioning last night that the Air Force has bought 100 B-21 Raiders at $550 million each that carry both conventional and nuclear weapons. And I asked the audience, because as I said, it's not just about the minds of people in Washington, it's yours. Ask yourself, don't just ask your congressmen or your senators, ask yourself, what do we need 100 planes for that carry conventional and nuclear weapons? When 10 of those, and that's being conservative, 10 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. So the part on that conversation about nuclear bomb treaty, the bad news there is not just about Putin, but about an arms deal having to do with the limit. What we should hold in our minds, we have been trained as Americans to expect too little and to ask too little. As this generation, not just of Americans, but of human beings, we should be visualizing a world without nuclear bombs.
Just a follow-up to that, what do you do, what does America do when a nation violates a treaty? So this issue continues to come up, and obviously that was sort of the precursor to the invasion of Iraq. What do you do, whether it's North Korea or Iran or Russia, when a nation, obviously there's the IAEA and there's different international bodies and organizations that monitor those sorts of things, but other than sanctions, and other than withdrawing from treaties, and other than war, what do you do when nations do not honor those?
Well, it's interesting that you just said as a precursor to the war in Iraq. That's not what happened. The United Nations inspectors at the time said he was not finished with his work. So that's actually not what happened. We did not get absolute certitude that they were in non-compliance. We didn't. And of course, as it turns out, they did not have the bombs, the weapons that we were all told we were supposed to be scared of. The person who is pulling out of treaties and messing with treaties that I'm most concerned about at the time is at the moment is the United States. The United States pulling out of the Paris Accord, the United States pulling out of the Iran. I'm more worried about how we are being who we're supposed to be. And the idea that we're just monitoring, making sure that everybody, and in the case of Iraq, that wasn't America just going around to make sure you were doing what the treaty said you were supposed to do. It was America going around making sure you were doing whatever the president at that time wanted you to do. So there are many ways in which my presidency would stand not only for being very vigilant about what other nations are doing, but first and foremost vigilant about our getting our own house in order and being the country that we should be. I also want to say one more thing, if I may, and that's about the word sanctions. I think that the average American, I would like you as citizens to think deeply about what sanctions do. Because that's a word they throw around. Okay, well, we'll just impose sanctions. And this is an example of the shallow conversation. You know, America is a grand story, and what happens here is extremely important. But the conversation that we have politically is very shallow. And it actually asks you to be shallow and talks to you as though it's okay, we're going to only go an inch down. I'd like you to go much further down. And this right now is a very important issue in terms of Venezuela. When you impose sanctions, this does not hurt the government, it hurts the people. Now the idea, Venezuela being a perfect example, is, okay, you're going to hurt the people, and then that's going to convince the military. All indications are what the military is getting for supporting Maduro, many of them, actually outweighs the conscience that many of them would feel seeing the hurt among people. But the more important issue is not whether or not we impose sanctions in Venezuela or anywhere else. And I'm not saying it's never a legitimate option. The problem I have is that this is such a common geopolitical tool, and too many Americans don't go any deeper than here in considering what that word means. That means children who the parents cannot get medicine for. It means people who cannot get food. That's what I want this campaign to present, to represent. The Taliban in Afghanistan is a perfect example. We're talking about whether or not our troops come home. This is so shallow. There's something so much bigger here than whether or not our troops come home. As important as that conversation is, the American people need to have heart. American people need to have compassion. I would like you to join with me in just considering what that will mean for the women of Afghanistan when the Taliban takes over. Americans are very good with a to-do list. We want somebody to just tell us what to do and we'll do it. And that's a high side of the American character. That's a beautiful thing. But some problems do not lend themselves to that. Some problems, there's a book called Letters to a Young Poet by the poet Rilke. And that's one of my favorite books. But one of my favorite parts of the book is that sometimes you don't have an easy answer, but you must live with the question. America, when I say America needs a moral and a spiritual awakening, that is what I mean. To ask, what is the moral thing to do? Not just somebody getting up and, well, that's the tough thing to do, we'll take care of American vital interests, when half the time what they're talking about is the vital interests of huge multinational corporate entities anyway. The American people need to grow up and rise up. And we've been trained to keep it shallow and to just sort of go along with the conceptualization that the political establishment is presenting to us. And as I said, it's a disempowerment. It's not an empowerment. We need to trickle up with our heart. So I'm not saying whether in any country what we quote unquote should do at any moment. But I will tell you this, and in some I would, because there are specifics that I know now. Some are hypothetical, I can't know. But what I can promise you is the consciousness with which I will make decisions. And they will never be based on simply who would make more money that might represent American interests, or what might represent the geopolitical power agenda of the United States. If I am president, the world will know that, and that to me this is the only survivable option in alignment with our values for the 21st century. The highest ally, the greatest ally of the United States will be humanity itself. And I will not just think about what the leader of the country is doing. I will think about what the effect of a particular action would be on the other human beings who live in that nation. I don't think that's naive, by the way. I think that the current conceptualization of the political establishment that considers itself so sophisticated is naive, because it does not take into account what we will need in order to survive as a species. Yes, sir.
Yeah, 5 years ago, Sherry and I and about 35 people walked from Los Angeles to DC, 30,000 miles, to raise awareness about climate change. And I honestly thought we'd be further along by 2019. It's disturbing, especially with the report coming out from the UN and the National Climate Assessment, giving us really 10 years to figure this out. We have about 10 years to figure this out. And still, a lot of Democrats are just kind of going at the snail's pace and the incremental pace. We have the Green New Deal, which is talking about going at a genuinely rapid, full mobilization pace. And so, some candidates are saying they support a Green New Deal, but then when you push them on whether they're willing to move that fast and that aggressively, they aren't. How about you?
Well, I think you need to be pushing the candidates on how fast and aggressively they will move. And I would be full on, this is a national emergency, and we must. There is no option. The survivability of the human race is at stake. So, to me, there would be no compromise. I think with any, certainly progressive Democrat, certainly including myself, one of the first things you would do is get those chemical company lobbyists and oil company lobbyists out of the leadership positions in the EPA. You would have a world-class environmentalist at the helm. You would bring together world-class environmental scientists, and my instruction to them would be: go, act, be bold. What do you need? And I feel that what I bring to the table is my skill set developed over 30 years, where I feel I could speak to the American people in a way that would help us build a kind of national consensus and understanding that this is not something that we can afford to do anything less than support wholeheartedly.
An issue connected to that locally is the Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yes.
Kathy actually lived on the route when they came and took people's land for this pipeline.
Right.
It's an issue that's really important to a lot of people in Iowa. Do you have an opinion about that?
Of course, I'm against the pipeline. The risks that we are taking, not even to mention the moral dimensions about the Native American tribes and the places where it goes in their land. The risks that we are taking, if one of these pipelines bursts, and this is an example, this is what an addict does. This is how an addict behaves. This is how a sociopath behaves. We have an economic system, a human being which has no remorse, no conscience, who isn't thinking about the effects of their actions on others, is called a sociopath. And we basically have an economic system that doesn't have any conscience, that doesn't care about any reverence to life, which in this case would include the life of the planet. It's a sociopathic economic system. So we, because American oil companies, Canadian oil companies, what are we doing here? This is what I mean by a moral and spiritual awakening. The risks that we are taking here, those risks would not be made. It's interesting because, when I say to you, love is what should matter, some people take that to mean, oh, that's kind of weak. Oh, no, there's nothing weak about that at all. That's fierce. I'm an American woman. And in every advanced mammalian species that survives and thrives, one of the common anthropological characteristics is the fierce behavior of the adult female of that species when she senses a threat to her cubs. You come after her baby, she's coming after you. You act irresponsibly with war, you act irresponsibly with the economy, you act irresponsibly with nuclear bombs, you act irresponsibly with climate change, you're coming after our babies. Stop right there. You come after our babies, we're coming after you. That's what America should stand for. Currently, the American government is, as often as not, and sometimes, and that's even being charitable, more of an advocate for the sources and for the economic interests that actually hurt people, or at least at the very best, don't really care. Sorry if people get hurt. That bottom line is our own short-term profit maximization. It is a moral fierceness. It is a moral fierceness that is necessary in order to create the pushback that is necessary. And that cannot just be from me either. It has got to be from the American people as a whole. Once again, that's what I feel like. Yes, ma'am.
So speaking as someone who lived on the route of that pipeline, I stood at the fence of my backyard and watched the earth get ripped up to put that pipe in. So I appreciate what you're saying. It's pumping 500,000 barrels of toxic crude through Iowa and other states every day. I'm wondering how you see a way out of our dependence on fossil fuels.
It's unnecessary even now. It's not even that we could get to the point where it's unnecessary. It is unnecessary now. Once again, put together, it's about our realizing that it is unnecessary even now. What we can do with wind, what we can do with solar, what we can do with clean energy, and the economic vibrancy that is created. And of course, that's the essence of the argument for the Green New Deal. Once again, we've been so propagandized, and we've been exhausted by the propaganda. I think the older you are, the more you know some things, and the younger you are, the more you know other things. The audacity of youth is beautiful, but the institutional memory of those of us who are older is beautiful too. We remember a time when Americans would not stand for this nonsense.
but they've worn us down. They've worn us down. That's what I mean about that. We were out there bam the bomb. We don't even. It's like we can't because it's a shock and awe technique at this point. So I so admire you. You know, my friend Frances Fisher over there. She was at Standing Rock, and I would see her tweets and I would see her missives about that. And that is what it takes. It is what it takes. It takes doing what you were doing. It takes doing what you were doing. You know, we all know the story of the little boy at the beach and the starfish, and he throws the starfish back into the ocean, and then somebody says to him, "But there's so many starfish. How are you going to make a difference for all the starfish?" And the little boy said, "Well, it's made a difference for that one starfish." You know, somebody said to me, some young man said to me at one of my lectures a few years ago. He said, "Miss Williamson, you're just an aging hippie. You know, what did you guys do? Just sex, drugs, and rock and roll." I remember saying, "Oh, that was just part of the day." And I said, the rest of the day, we stopped a war. We stopped a war. What have you done was the strong implication. So we were out there. People power. That is the one thing, and I know it's exhausting, but you know, Americans, this is not a moment to get all precious. Like, I can't do it, I can't take it, it's just too much. No, it's not a moment for that. It's not a moment for that. Yes, sir.
As an ex-hippie,
What's a hippie? Always a hippie. That's different now.
and at the risk of sounding like a cynic, you're up against this populist movement, and people don't care about climate. People don't care about getting any deeper than right here. We have a very shallow administration with easy solutions. How are you going to win? That's what you're up against.
Well, first of all, if everybody that you just described, the problem and what elected Donald Trump is not just the people that you described. The problem is how many of us stayed home. The problem is how many of us voted third party in that election. So, you know, in anything in life, whether it's personal or collective, you got to look at yourself first. So let's be really clear about what happened there. You say we're up against. If everybody who feels as strongly as you do about what you just said are the only ones who vote, we'll be fine. The issue is that those who represent some of the worst aspects of the American character, including grandiosity and denial, in addition to racism, homophobia, bigotry, anti-Semitism, etc., rose up politically. They're convicted, and they took their convictions and they turned them into political force. The problem is not that there are more of them than us. The problem is that those of us who love, we have not taken our dignity and our decency and our compassion and our reverence for the earth and reverence for our ancestors and reverence for our descendants and reverence for our children, reverence for each other. We have not turned that into a political force. So it's not about them. It's always easy to point at the other people, not about them. I'm not up against them. I'm up against our own resistance to being who we need to be right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And cynicism is just an excuse for not helping. And none of this devil's advocates, the devil does not need an advocate. Okay, who's next? Yes, sir.
I was immensely impressed by the comments you made last night.
Thank you.
I went, actually, during the event, I posted to Facebook. No doubt Marianne Williamson is the most radical candidate for president, bar none. Very astonished. You were not what I expected, in a very good way. The pushback I got, well, I came out wrong, but you know what I mean. I didn't know what to expect, but some of the things that raised concerns in reading about you are the same things that I got pushback on last night.
Okay.
Separation of church and state.
Okay, let's
And
go.
spirituality and those things raise red flags with people
Okay.
that I think are misplaced. But I'd love to hear your comments on it.
Okay, first of all, love is radical. How many of us have children? Would you not do anything? Would you not do anything? That's number one. Number two, just as a woman, why didn't you expect it? Yeah, John.
Because usually in our discourse, talking about spirituality
Okay, I get it. Okay.
is a trigger word for a different approach.
Okay.
He dug himself out.
First of all, let's take on the issue of church and state.
The separation of church and state is one of the most enlightened aspects of the U.S. Constitution. It has a dual purpose. Number one, it protects the government from interference by religious forces. Unlike a nation like Iran, where the Ayatollah can come in and say, you can't pass this law and you have to pass that law. No minister, rabbi, priest, mullah, mufti, etc. can come into the halls of Congress and say, scrap this law, substitute this law. That cannot happen. But it also means that if somebody is having a pagan meeting, a Wicca meeting, a Jewish meeting, a Muslim meeting, a Christian meeting, an atheist meeting, no police person can come in and say, okay, break it up. Both are essential to our freedom. Separation of church and state, however, given that, was not introduced by the founders just to protect the government. It was also introduced to protect, not to limit, but to protect religious voices. Now you'll notice nothing I said here today has anything to do with religious doctrine or dogma. When you talk about morality, traditionally, and I'm reminded of a line from JFK, that America cannot afford to be materially rich but spiritually poor. When you talk about moral issues, I remember I grew up at a time when Bobby Kennedy was saying, this is a fight for the soul of America. When Martin Luther King Jr., nobody complained, thank you very much. Notice that? I mean, when he talked about everything in the context of what is correct in our relationship to a higher power. When we talk about morality and you look at the tradition of American politics, the tradition has been that people on the right have tended to focus on issues of private morality. But on the left, we have focused on issues of public morality. One of the reasons we're losing on these things is because we are not contextualizing poverty as a moral issue, because we're not contextualizing mass incarceration as a moral issue, because we are not contextualizing economic injustice and unfair tax laws and the systematic neglect of children as a moral issue. Moral values give you your juice. And so when the Democratic Party, when the left moved into this overly secularized, technocratic, basically corporatized conversation of dollars and cents, what you lost is the heart of things. And you lose the heart of things, you're no longer talking to people where they live. The president and those like him are masters of the false narrative. And if you just come at that with intellectual economic analysis, they will eat you alive, which they have. The only way to override that is by speaking the fierce, authentic, deep truth. And that, sir, is the truth of the heart. That's all that spirituality is the path of the heart. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Marianne. I'm Amanda Levon.
So nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. I love your books. I think you're a wonderful author.
Thank you.
And I just really want to know your place in politics here. So I really want to talk about Iowa and what you can do to stop corporations from breaking up our family farms and polluting our air and water.
Okay. Well, whether it's agribusiness or fossil fuel companies or chemical companies or health insurance companies or big pharma or military industrial complex, it's all the same problem. And the question, unfortunately, maybe in a democracy it's not unfortunate, it's just something we need to awaken from. The president does not have a magic wand. And anybody who comes in here and says, send me to Washington, I'll use my magic, they have no magic wand. Nor do we want the president to have a magic wand, by the way. We're already seeing the Clinton party. It is not what I can do, ma'am, it's what we can do. It's what we can do. Now, what I can do is highlight the issue as it relates to American farming, as I'm seeking to highlight the issue as it relates to all ways in which multinational corporate conglomerates have become our new big brother to such devastating effects. I don't believe that candidates, when I say this with all due respect, who say they're going to go fight for you, but are taking campaign donations from the same corporations that we're supposed to go fight. I mean, let's all be aware here. Agribusiness, one of the reasons why the issue of the devastation to farming matters is not, it goes back to a moral and spiritual issue. You don't have to be a farmer, and this has to do with climate change, the pipeline, etc. You don't have to be someone who is living on the land where that pipeline is. You don't have to be a farmer to know that it is hurting the fabric of our humanity for us to desecrate the human connection to the land and to food. I read a wonderful book. Have you read Sarah Smarsh's book, Heartland? Sarah Smarsh, you probably read Hillbilly Elegy. Well, anyway, if you haven't, in Heartland, the subtitle is Going Broke, Working Hard and Going Broke in the Richest Country in the World. She grew up in Kansas. And it is such a heartbreaking story, her memoir, of what has happened to the American farmer. And it goes beyond economics. That's the thing. We need to have a more human conversation here than just what it's done to the American farmer in terms of what these tariffs have done and the aluminum and the tractors and the corn and the soybean. It's deeper than that. It has taken, there's a reason it's called the heartland. Farming, it's intimacy. It's intimacy with the food. It's intimacy with the land. This is insane that we have taken the earth just to use it. Where do we make more money? Where can we make more money? What agribusiness in too many cases is doing to the farmers is what they've been doing to India for years. This is terrible. Taking agency away from the farmer, their seed, their land, what they do, what they grow, what they sell. And this is what I meant about foreign policy in Afghanistan. It will not be changed until Americans allow ourselves to go deeper into an understanding of the level of the problem. That is what will make you get out of bed in the morning and go to the state capitol down the street and make sure that your voices get heard. That is what will make you get up out of your exhaustion that has been created. Moral and spiritual disconnection weakens us. And then we are prey, and then we're so easy prey. They don't have to kill us, all they have to do is silence us. Right? That's all I have to do. Make us too tired. But when you are aligned, you don't get rid of the darkness by fighting the darkness. You get rid of the darkness by embracing the light. And the light is, what are we doing here? I mean, who among us has not had a best friend? There was a movie several years ago. It was a documentary many years ago about a comedian that some of you are so young you probably don't remember, named Richard Pryor.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that documentary? And I think the issue was crack cocaine. And who was that famous football player? Was it Jim Brown? Jim Brown, was it? I think it was Jim Brown, wasn't it? And who in the movie kept going over to Richard Pryor and saying, "What you gonna do?" He just wouldn't get out of his face. What you gonna do? He just wouldn't get out of his face. And that's what we need to say to each other. The times when I've changed the most in my life, I have to say, has not just been when people coddled me, but when people I respected said, "What are you doing? Who are you today? What are we doing?" So when you say to me, what am I going to do? What I'm going to do is also ask you, what are you going to do? And that's what I meant before about, I'm going to go to Washington, I'm going to fix it. What I'm going to do is hopefully inspire you by standing for the same principles in Washington that you need to stand for in Des Moines. Because the forces that are the most destructive to our democracy are not just at work in Washington. They're at work in local governments, they're at work in state governments, and they're at work in the sinews of our civilization by convincing us through the advertising. And that's an example, the one you're mentioning about agribusiness. I've been to the airport in Des Moines enough now. I've been to the airport. I was getting off the plane, walking to baggage, and I said to my friend, "Look at that ad."
Farm Bureau International.
Look at that ad. That's what you need to know when to laugh. And in the grand tradition of Americans to say, "Hell no." Does that make sense? And can you say this is not political? I would say to you, when is the traditional political establishment going to start saying some of the things which they know? Everybody who's running, let's be very clear, they know what I'm saying, and they're not going to name it. Why do you think that is? So maybe because I'm naming it, there will be some motivation for others to do so too. It'll be fun to watch. Yes, sir.
Hey, my name is MJ Ghazali.
And thank you for having us here.
Thanks for being here. It's an honor. Well, we're Lebanese. We've been living in town for decades. We own restaurants. Half of the town and Iowa know about us. You know, Lebanon come from old history, like 7,000 years from the Phoenicians. Immigrants, it's a big issue, big thing right now in the United States, big subject, one of the big subjects. The United States was built on immigrants too.
Yes.
There's a lot of good immigrants and a lot of bad immigrants. A lot of good yes citizens, a lot of bad yes citizens.
Right. Same.
Exactly. So I graduated from American University of Beirut with a degree of business administration. AUB was built in 1866. It's an American University of Beirut. If you become the president of the United States, what would you do for the immigration law?
I think we'd all agree that one of the most destructive elements of our current administration's policy has been behavior towards immigrants. Once again, what we need is a return to our basic democratic and deeply human values. You are a first-generation immigrant, but everyone in this room, except those who are descended from slaves, or if anyone is descended from Native Americans who were here for thousands of years before the white settler came, we are all descended from immigrants. All four of my grandparents came through Ellis Island, along with the other 12 million people who between 1891, I think, when it opened, and 1954, I think, when it closed. I think I have my dates right. I know it closed in 54. I think it opened in 1891, somewhere along there. The point being that it has been, as we all know, a grand tradition of the United States to recognize that we are a nation of immigrants. This is an example of what I mean. We need to get back to our values. And if we ourselves, our values, the embrace of the immigrant among them, cannot just be inscribed on marble walls somewhere. They cannot just be written on parchment. They have to be inscribed in our hearts. What happened at the southern border, the cruel separation of those parents from those children, any of us with a cell phone, any of us with a cell phone, so let's just take a picture of that mother with that child because later we have to find her. Or do you have a phone number, ma'am? Do you have a contact? And Guatemala, well, didn't even bother. But what I found interesting is when the news media was talking to one of the architects, one of the Trump administration officials who came up with that policy, this is what the person said. Well, we just didn't think anybody would care. We didn't think anybody would even notice. Now, the good news is we did. The bad news is the assumption. That's when they've got you, when they know you're not going to do anything. And this is a perfect example. I am heartened on this issue by how many Americans are horrified by what's going on at the border. So that's the good news. I am deeply concerned, however, about the humanitarian crisis. There is in humanitarian aid work, there are two phrases that are significant. One is screaming emergency, and one is silent emergency. Americans tend to be very good because we have a conscience. We're good with the screaming emergencies. Like, hell, what are you doing? But there are millions of American children who live in what are called the domestic war zones, whether that has to do with their families, whether it has to do with their streets, their communities, whose PTSD, as psychologists tell us, is no less severe than the PTSD of returning Iraq and Afghanistan veteran. These children go to schools where there are not even enough school supplies to adequately teach them to read. And if they cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of their high school graduation is drastically diminished. The chances of their incarceration are drastically increased. On a human level, it's all the same children. And on a moral level, it's the same disconnection. So the deeper problem is not just what the Trump administration has done about immigration. The deeper problem is that they thought they could get away with it. That's the deeper problem. That's the deeper problem. That's what I was saying. They're an opportunistic infection. And they've only been able to do what they've done because we have been a weakened immune system. In a democracy, every cell, every citizen must see ourselves as part of the immune system, walking for climate change, showing up at the pipeline, showing up at the state capitol, having to do with farmers, agribusiness, etc. Each of us, not just now, by the way. You know, everybody's saying it's a hands-on-deck moment, and it is a hands-on-deck moment, but it's only got this bad because we forgot that democracy is a hands-on-deck. You're going to lose your marriage. If you don't tend to your body, you're going to lose your health. And if you don't tend to your democracy, don't go getting all surprised and shocked that the thieves are at the door. So what we need on immigration, like with everything else, is more and more of a moral awakening. The good news on that one is I do believe it's happening. There are some issues on immigration where issues that need to be addressed, chain migration, etc. And there are some ideas on both left and right that can be worked out. But the basic concept, the basic democratic and American ideal is what has been assaulted here. And we know this. This is an example of unfortunately, of the false narrative. There was no crisis at the border. There was no crisis at the border. This is all just made up. And I do not believe that our problem is how many people are buying it. The problem is if enough people who are not buying it just remain silent and passive at this time. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question regarding the labor unions. Because of course the immigrants, when they came, they joined the labor unions and there were millions that were killed. And I, as a woman who's been involved in the labor union for over 30 years, organizer and such, that, you know, it concerns me because, you know, America needs to continue the growth of the unions and also in order to educate our young people and put them to work.
Right. Okay.
Female as well as male.
The problem, the opponents of democracy in America is neither progressives nor conservatives, but an authoritarian corporatism. Now, the great tradition of America, since our founding, has been to push back against overreach by unfettered capitalist forces. That is where child labor laws came from. That is where the unions came from. Remember, they hanged Joe Hill. And what were his last words? Don't mourn, organize. Since 1980, this corporatist agenda, which amounts to an assault on our democracy, central to its agenda has been an attack on unions. So you put it very politely, you put it very nicely, but I bet that at the deepest level, you were deeply saddened and deeply horrified and deeply outraged. And what I'm saying is so am I. And what I'm saying is this is the best tradition of Americans to be. This has been an example, and they're winning. That's the thing. And we have to, as Democrats, realize that they've been winning even under Democratic presidents. Because we're still playing the let's be the best version of the same old, same old. It's like an undertow. You're swimming, but there's an undertow. We need to name it. We need to name it. This is an attack on unions. And it is part of what has created the wealth inequality that we are experiencing today. It's a large part of what has created the wealth inequality that we are experiencing today. So you would have a very much a pro-union president on your hands if I were president of the United States. Notice how the political establishment uses special interests a lot. Can we name the names here, please? It's special interest thing. Okay, yes, sir. That's because I don't want to offend anybody specifically in case they're donating to my campaign. Yeah.
Marianne, I'm Channing Dunn.
I know you are.
And I'm an attorney. A lot of people don't know that. And I'm seeing climate change in so many areas of my life.
Yeah.
Climate change is already dominating issues in the legal system. You know, BP or PG&E just takes bankruptcy to avoid responsibility for 16,000 buildings destroyed and 90 dead in the Paradise Fire. And that litigation's going to go on forever, all of our lifetime. But we've had questions about farms, and we know that climate change has a direct role in farms, and water runoff and water quality. We have questions about immigration, and we know that migration is maybe the biggest fingerprint of climate change.
We could have up to 200 million climate refugees in the
Right.
next few
And I'm one of these people who believes you can't build a wall high enough to keep desperate people out. So, but could you let us look inside you, and when you see these issues, jobs, migration, farms, the economy, the future of our society, where does climate percolate up for you? I mean, do you see it with the alarm that I guess I see it?
Well, first of all, I do see intersectionality and I see interrelatedness among all of these things. But I think that we do have to prioritize urgency. I'm reminded of when Frederick Douglass met with Susan B. Anthony, and the feminists realized that as important suffrage was, slavery was a greater human atrocity and needed to be dealt with first. And that's you prioritize if you have a broken leg or you have a bullet near the heart. What do you need to address first? And that's how I see climate change. It's a we must. The survival of the human race is possibly at stake. And that's why I see it as first and foremost.
So when you wake up in the morning and you read the headline in today's paper that says gigantic hole in Antarctica going to lead to ice shelf collapse, are you immediately going, oh my goodness, this is climate right before my eyes?
Yeah, but I'm old enough to remember the first Earth Day. So I'm old enough that this has been part of my, I'm not like new to this topic. But I see, I would not be here did I not see all of these things as representing an urgent peril to the survival of our democracy and possibly the survival of the human race. So do I see it as urgent? Yes, but I see it as urgent in what I think is a mature way. I'm a 66-year-old woman. I can't wake up every morning outraged, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I'm running because I don't want to just spend all day screaming at the television. You know, I've noticed that about myself. If something's a little bit wrong, I get all upset. If something's seriously wrong, I get calm and focused. So I'm calm and focused. To me, it is a given that the red lights are blinking. You don't need a president who wakes up every day nervous and hysterical. You need a president who every day is going to do what needs to be done. You know, I'm a bit of a World War II buff, and I'm fascinated by Franklin Roosevelt. I'm fascinated by Churchill. Do you know what? When you look at the way, I mean, they slammed the Nazis. Do you know what Franklin Roosevelt, how he referred to the Nazis? You know what his words were? Because remember what was in the evildoers? Those unworthy men. It just shows such a level of emotional maturity and sobriety. We're just going to do what has to be done. That's where I'm coming from. I'm a mother. We just need to do what has to be done. And I don't think you want a president. I'm convincing you to the best of my ability of my sense of urgency, or I would not be running. But as your president, you don't need somebody who's off a clint every day. Does that make sense?
It does.
Thank you.
So you won't be tweeting feverishly.
Just two more questions.
You might ask yourself, by the way, I'm not going to go there.
One
Yes,
more
sir.
question. Medical marijuana.
How about marijuana, period?
Yeah, I want to tell you a story. I'm not telling a story that I heard, but I live it and I lived it. It's my sister. She's almost 44 years old. She was born blue, like with this mean lack of oxygen, and
Blue baby.
yes, then she started having seizures. The seizures stopped at 9 years old and turned into Tourette's, like vocal tics, agitation, all this kind of stuff. So she was put on chemicals, 3 different medications that it fed her more to be. She has bipolar. She didn't sleep, like a little insomnia. She slept by minutes at night and stuff. I used to live in California, which it's legal there. When I moved to Des Moines, and I found out it was illegal to do that. So my sister is on cannabis oil right now. All this made big difference for her. She's not on medication anymore. She sleeps. You don't hear vocal tics anymore. She focus. She go back to school, and she's living really a great life. I know in Canada it's legal all over. You know, here there's certain states. I think it's legal here, but it's very, very expensive. I mean, not everybody could afford to do that. So, do you have any
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you.
As a mother, you should,
And not only
feel what
that-
mom felt, like her shadow all her life with her,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think, and, this is not a but, and there's a larger issue here about marijuana. When you look at the gateway drugs to the opioid crisis in the United States, ladies and gentlemen, it's not marijuana, it's legal pharmaceutical.
Yes.
We need to be clear about who the main drug dealers are in this country. So this is another example where let's all grow up. And making it all about marijuana is a convenient distraction from talking about what's really going on. Yes, sir.
So we recently saw with the government shutdown a clear illustration and example of an inability of Republicans and Democrats to be able to work together and find
Yes.
compromise. Obviously, the country is extremely polarized, very divided. How would you break that divide? How would you be able to cross the aisle and reach an agreement and get things done?
Okay. We need to not be naive about this. No matter who you send to the White House, it's going to matter who the Congress is. So that's out of my control. The Republican Party needs its soul back, and the Democratic Party needs its soul back. We need healthy political parties in this country. That's a whole other concept about how many, but these two main parties, certainly we do. The unity, our foundational principle is e pluribus unum, out of many one, unity and diversity. Now what does that mean? The diversity is part of our richness. We're gay, straight, black, brown, white, Jew, Muslim, atheist, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu. That's cool. We're hipster, we're traditional. Nobody owes it to anybody else to be any different than they are. That's the beauty of America. Our unity is equally important. And our unity is our fealty, our common fealty to our democratic principles. What you need is more Americans who understand that our fealty to those principles must take primacy over merely economic issues. We have been lured into a politics that's only about dollars and cents, which has made us vulnerable to disconnection from moral and spiritual values, which has made us prey to the political corruption that in no way has served us economically or in any other area. I want to remind the American people of some quaint sayings that are not quaint at all. All men are created equal. All men are created equal, including that person at your border who came up here who walked for miles and miles and miles and miles with their child. All men are created equal. God gave all men inalienable rights to life and to liberty and to the pursuit of happiness. And according to the Declaration of Independence, governments are instituted among men to secure those rights. And according to Abraham Lincoln, ours is to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. You can't really have fealty to those things and look at immigration the same way. You can't have fealty to those things and look at those children living in domestic war zones the same way. You can't have fealty to those things and look at any issue in a way where you have been lured into the propaganda about an over-secularized, over-corporatized perspective. Someone said to me in an interview yesterday, you know, you're all about inspiration and hope, but what does that have to do with politics? Politics is so not about that. It's not inspirational. And I said, then what is the Declaration of Independence? What is the abolitionist movement if not inspirational? What was the women's suffragette movement if not inspirational? What was the civil rights movement if not inspirational? The fact that this politics has been developed that is so not that, we're not supposed to go into that and be like, okay, we'll toe the line with that and we'll think that way. You know, when Lincoln said, as our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. We must disenthrall ourselves of a certain consciousness that should not even be in Congress. But people have put those people in Congress. It's when we change that we will make different decisions in who we elect. And I hope that begins with the presidency. Thank you so much.
MJ serves great food here. I encourage you to stick around and get some.
Okay, everybody is invited today on me for lunch, all right? Please, you guys. Whoever wants to have lunch, I'll be more than happy.